Welcome to Hurt Less, Live More, a show where we acknowledge the hurt that we experience in life and find ways to move on from that to live life to the full. I'm JJ Stenhouse. I'm the practical alchemist, and with me, as ever, is psychiatrist and coach Dr. Mark Goulston, plus our guest today, Melissa Bernstein. Now, Mark, I'll let you do the full honors for Melissa here.
Happy to. Well, she is the co-founder of Melissa and Doug Toys and the co-founder of Lifeline. She's an entrepreneur, visionary, creative, female leader, and mother of six.
Yeah, I know.
And
yeah,
and her
and
toy
that doesn't
company.
even count Doug. Doug is the most ornery, immature child I have.
Oh, we're going to go on because my friends say to me, "You look so young for 75." I say, "What's the secret?" I say, I don't worry about anything because I have a wife who worries about everything.
Wow.
and plus I'm immature. And my wife says, you don't have to be so proud of it. And anyway, she's the co-founder of the tremendously successful toy company, Melissa and Doug. And she spent the last 30 years helping children discover themselves, their passions, their purpose through open-ended play. And she's been on a personal journey of self-discovery and acceptance, using her unparalleled creativity to reinvent well-being products and help adults find calm at her new venture Lifelines. I'm going to share something that I've been working on, Melissa, that I think I've discovered one of the sources of depression and sources of anxiety, and I'm going to run it by you. I think one of the sources of depression is that something doesn't turn out the way you expected it to. So you can be hugely successful, but feel there's something really empty, something missing. And it doesn't feel like you can achieve your way out of it. And I think when people can realize that maybe they set themselves up frequently to have these expectations of either personal happiness or success, and then when it doesn't deliver on something, I think internal, they don't know what to do with it. So I wanted to share that with you and welcome you to the show. And we want to hear about all things Melissa.
Well, I love what you just said. And actually, I take the onus of blame for that away from the individual, and I put it squarely on society. Because I think we are given a message, at least in Western society, right from the time we're born, that we have to strive for this pursuit of success and this pursuit of happiness and all these extrinsic things. And that when we attain them, we will be able to rest easy. And the problem is when your definition of success is extrinsic, right? And it's based on all these things like status and role and outward respect and title and financial, material success. It cannot by definition fill our inner void.
I used to do house calls to dying patients. I'm a psychiatrist, a death and dying suicide specialist for many years. And I would try to help them make peace with themselves at the end. And I remember someone I was meeting who was dying, and I said to him, you look awful, and I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. So what's going on? And he said, I don't think I've ever done anything important in my life. And I said, are you kidding? You have hospitals named after you. You've created thousands of jobs. And he looked at me and he said, don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. I've got everything that money can buy. And everything that I thought was important is unimportant. And everything that I thought was unimportant is important. And I've run out of time to fix it.
So you just zoomed in on something really important, and being there at the end of life. I mean, the number one regret of people on their deathbed is I never lived a life true to myself. I lived the life that others expected of me. So it goes right back to what we started with, which are these extrinsic values that society makes us believe are our life goal. And then we finally realize that we've attained it, but yet we aren't fulfilled in any way, because what society tells us will bring our lives meaning might not even be remotely what we, when we look inward, really define as bringing our lives meaning.
What do you think of the notion? And then I want JJ to weigh in as a journalist who's spent a lot of time interviewing people about these subjects. I have this notion that technology, tech giants have addicted the world to adrenaline-based dopamine and oxytocin, which is about human connection and caring and tenderness, especially, has gone by the wayside, and people don't have the patience to lean into the tenderness and the listening and the compassion that brings you closer to people. And a lot of the tech giants, let's face it, they're not the best at connecting to people, and they've addicted the world to excitement and adrenaline as a way to feed your dopamine.
Well, I think that's true. And I think also they are offering a false narrative in many ways, because so much that's posted on social media isn't reality. It's just something that's been made up for clicks and likes and, some feedback that makes you feel better, when actually the real you is cowering in a corner. But there is something in what you say about there being a lack of kindness. Only yesterday, I was with a friend. We were actually sea foraging, and we were parking the car in a village near me to go out into the rock pools, and we had a great time out there. I can tell you that the traffic was just, it was normal, but there was such short-temperedness, if you like. Nobody could give way. Nobody was being kind. Nobody was on anything but a short fuse. And this was a Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining, and you'd expect people to be a little bit more empathetic. But I've seen, and she remarked, have you seen how everybody's just so ready to just really fire off these days?
Yeah. So Melissa, you're our guest, and as I read between the lines, as we read between the lines, unpack this personal journey, because you've accomplished and achieved amazing success. You're a household brand. My children and grandchildren know about your products. But talk about how that journey wasn't what led you to Lifelines.
I mean, the good news is it's exactly what we've been speaking about. It was that, at early on, I mean, I am a highly sensitive, overexcitable person, and have a lot of deep thoughts. And I would say I ponder higher realities, and did so from the time I was like 2 years old. And one of those was like, why am I here? What is the meaning of life if I'm ultimately going to just turn into dust? And what am I meant to do during my brief time here? And I literally pondered those questions ever since I can remember even thinking, like 2, 3 years old. And I think when I showed some of that sort of darkness, because it really made me agitated, and I felt that drumbeat of mortality like beating in me from my earliest days, when I showed some of that to the world, I did not get a good response. In fact, I got like this look of horror, and this mentality that you're a child. Like, why are you thinking about such deep things? That's for when you get older. Like, go out and play, have fun, be like the other kids. And in my mind, I was thinking, don't you think I want to be like the other kids? Don't you think I want to be fun and carefree and not care filled? But unfortunately, I couldn't be like the other kids as much as I tried. And I think the more I tried to, the more these thoughts plagued me. So I had to buy into the societal definition of fitting in and belonging, because we all have a innate need to belong, right? We can't just be alone on an island. So I adopted a way of being, a coping mechanism that served me fairly effectively well growing up, which was pleasing and becoming someone who just did what anyone and everyone asked of me and did it perfectly and got that validation in being like good, and perfectionism. And that was to be the best I could possibly be, you know, academically, socially, in all my performance and behavior. And that gave me sort of the gold stars that I equated with love and fitting in. And I really, you know, sort of followed that up until we started Melissa and Doug. And I think, but the one thing I was very disconnected from was my creativity, because although I created ever since I was young, all my creativity was very dark. And when you have thoughts of mortality and futility and meaninglessness, which is called nihilism, you know, that channeled into some really dark writings, dark verses, dark music. And I never connected with the ability to channel that darkness into something that I could share with others. So my creativity stayed really dark and locked inside me. But when we decided to form Melissa and Doug, I was only 22 and Doug was 24. We were literally, I guess now I could say, you know, just babies. I realized for the first time that like I actually had this ability to take that innate darkness and channel it into something light and bright, no less a toy that actually had the ability to unleash joy in a child. And that was, I would say, a true epiphany and revelation, and made me feel for the very first time that perhaps I could derive some meaning from this darkness that threatened to end my life.
Just as a sidebar, this is listened to all over the world. So just for anybody who might not have heard of Melissa and Doug, what kind of toys do you make?
So we make what are called open-ended toys, which are toys that don't beckon to the child from the outside, right? They don't scream through bright lights and music and loud sounds like, come over, play with me. They are toys that only become magic once they are in a child's hands. And no matter what child's hands they're in, they become different because that child is bringing their own unique experience to them. So an open-ended child is just a means to an end. It is just a bridge between boredom and unleashing the power of your imagination to make the ordinary extraordinary. So we look at the toy as just that catalyst. And once in the hands of the child whose imagination becomes unleashed, they can become whatever that child wants them to be.
So is it something that you can create from, or what? Or is it an actual thing that the child can customize?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So we make toys. Gosh, I've created about 10,000 toys in every category of early childhood. So we do manipulatives, we do role play, we do pretend play, we have puzzles, we have games, you name it. We have infant toys. We go all the way up through pretty much every basic category of childhood and children's play.
Love it. I love it. Sorry, Mark, you were going to ask something before I rudely interrupted you.
About unpacking.
Yeah, but you just said so much that I need to take it in. I sometimes think of book titles for people. So can I offer a book title for you?
Sure.
He's great at this. He's great at this.
Keeping Wonder Alive.
I love that. And that is, I think, one of the keys of becoming our best selves. I call it potentializing, is that ability to find the extraordinary in the ordinary each and every day and keeping that inner child alive. And I think that, talk about another source of depression. It's when our inner child that just longs to play. And play is so beautiful because play was mindfulness long before the term mindfulness came to be, right? Play is our innate state of being. It's what we exist to do, to feel free, to engage in joyful things with no goal, with no extrinsic purpose. And that is when we are in our flow state and when we are freest. But of course, what has happened, and you talk about technology, and our rail at Melissa and Doug was to take back childhood, because we felt that it wasn't just technology. It started with helicopter parents and overscheduling and schools, teaching to the test and removing things like art in recess. But it devolved into technology as well, taking this beautiful free time that children would use to play, and thinking that play, who needs play, right? They're not doing anything, are they? But play is the greatest gift and essential for humans to figure out who they are. Not only access joy, but through play, we engage in trial and error and really defining what we like and what we don't like and who we are.
Melissa, I couldn't agree with you more, and we'll speak more about that. But right now, it's time for us to take a very short break. We'll be back right after this from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Hurt Less, Live More here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio station. With me, JJ, and Dr. Mark Goulston, and our guest today, Melissa Bernstein. And Mark, I think you wanted to take this a little bit further.
Now, something that Melissa was talking about was taking sort of a darkness or a tendency towards darkness, or what Susan Cain would call bittersweet, and turning it into something that was light and life-giving. And during the break, we were talking about logotherapy and meaning, and how that can be not just immediately gratifying, but fulfilling and satisfying. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit for us, Melissa.
Absolutely. So I mentioned that I was born in an existential meaning crisis, meaning I didn't have meaning from birth and needed to find my meaning to be set free. And I think that plagued me until, honestly, very recently, when just by accident, I discovered Viktor Frankl, who wrote these amazing books. He wrote 20 books, but the book that really changed my life is Man's Search for Meaning, where he talked about his life imprisoned, not his life, but 4 years of his life imprisoned in 3 or 4 different concentration camps, and how everything was stripped from him, literally every single thing, and how in that situation, he had to find meaning in the face of unavoidable suffering or he would perish. And that became the basis for his ideology of logotherapy. And that theory, that ideology, has truly transformed my life.
So can you talk a little bit about the lack of meaning or the search for it, or you didn't know what to call it? Because you said this is relatively recent, and Lifelines is relatively recent given your entire career.
Yeah, so I think, I always felt this profound loss of meaning, right? That I didn't quite know what I was doing, and that people were going around acting like they were having so much fun. And the only word that I could use to describe it is absurd. And that is the essence of nihilism and a nihilistic attitude. I really felt that existence was meaningless, and that I, as an individual, had no ability to make meaning in a meaningless existence. And that nihilistic attitude is what causes many people to end their lives. And I was really close to ending my life because I didn't want to be here if there wasn't any way I could change the fate that I was doomed to experience. And I think the first time I started to feel a little bit of a sense of empowerment was when I started to create toys, because that was the first time that I realized that I had a choice. And by the way, existentialism, which is the antidote to existential nihilism, is about us as humans taking responsibility for making meaning in our lives. And that first time I realized that I had the capacity to channel darkness into light and make toys was this epiphany that I had a choice, that I could actually take this darkness and either continue to channel it into more darkness, which would never touch anyone, or I could actually turn off the darkness faucet, turn on the light faucet, and actually channel it into light and make these light, bright toys. And that was the first sense of empowerment, and not feeling this victim mindset that I felt. But even though, so that continued for the next 3 decades, and I built a beautiful life. Like, I didn't realize all these things, they were unconscious. And I built a beautiful life. I have a life partner, Doug, who's been by my side since I was 19, and we built this business together. We have 6 children. Like, I was living a charmed life in every sense, like too good, and giving this, this sort of image that everything was perfect. But as I got into my 40s, and I believe that I sort of was able to put up the dam of resistance and repression to all that darkness, that nihilism that I had turned off. Don't forget, I told you I turned off the dark faucet, right? That was the only way I could exist. So all that nihilism was in me, like imprisoned in there. And I had been this light, bright, which is part of me, I now see. But as I got into my 40s, that darkness started like wanting to come out. It started saying, listen, honey, like, you can't keep me down there forever. And my wall of protection started to weaken. I was getting older, and some cracks started to come up, and I started to feel inauthentic. I started to feel like I had just become like one of my toys. I was in this really pretty package on a shelf under these lights that, made it look perfect. But in truth, I was hiding my essence. And that sort of started the journey from inauthenticity to revealing my truth and sort of living more in this authentic place.
It takes courage to do that, I think. And I know that for a lot of us, it takes almost a lifetime to get that courage. So it's fantastic to hear that you have already achieved that place, or got to that place where you can happily reveal yourself, your true self.
Yeah, you just said something so important. You can finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No, you go on. You're the guest.
You just said something so important, because people will say to me all the time, like, Melissa, I'm 75, I'm 80, and I finally understand it, and it's too late. Or why didn't I do it before? And they feel such tremendous guilt that it's taken them this long, which, by the way, when I did this, I felt the same way. I was like, why did it take me 50 years to get to this point? But what I realized is it doesn't happen until you're ready.
Yeah.
And if you're not ready, you're not ready. And once I was ready, the good news is I didn't care what anybody thought. Like, I was so ready, right? The pain of existing as I was no longer tolerable. And I had no choice. So the great news is, once you're ready, I was like, woohoo, like, say whatever you want to say about me, like, I'm doing this. And I think that's the encouraging thing, that whether it's at 20 or at 80, it doesn't matter. Once you're free, you are free.
Beautifully put. Yeah.
That's lovely. I want to share an anecdote, because these trigger anecdotes in me. So when I was a medical student, one of my side jobs was I worked at the Home for the Aged, Jewish Home for the Aged in Jamaica Plain, Boston. And, and I was young and had my whole life in front of me. And there was a Mr. Cohen who was probably in his late 80s. And he was there and he was spry and was an incredibly depressing place. And I would go there and I do cardiograms. And so I go from room to room and he was just filled with energy. And I said, Mr. Cohen, why are you here? You're so full of energy. I mean, you walk down the hall, you smell urine, you do all this sort of stuff. And he says, I like being here. And I said, I don't get it. And he said, pull up a chair, Sonny. And he said, my wife is 2 floors away from me, and she had a stroke 3 or 4 years ago. And we escaped from the Russian Revolution some years ago. And she saved my life. I saved her life. And every day I go down there and I bathe her, I braid her hair. She smiles. I don't know that she knows me. She probably doesn't. And I bathe her, I change her diaper, and I read my Jewish newspaper. And again, in my young thing, I don't get it. You could visit. You could, you don't have to stay here. She doesn't even know you're here. And he looked at me and he said, I get to give her dignity. And that's why I want to be here. And I didn't get it. And he said, someday you might. And I'm starting to get it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds very much like Viktor Frankl and a lot of the philosophy that I've been studying, because that is exactly right. It is about finding the meaning potential in every situation and making the most of it. And, it's very much akin to, these cliche gratitude practices now, or what play is, which is finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. I mean, play is exactly that, which is the real irony, is sort of where I started with Melissa and Doug in play, is where I am right now with meaning. Because meaning is exactly that. It's getting back to that inner child and being able to see the meaning in everything, even unavoidable suffering. And, Frankl says that the highest honor is reserved for those who can change their attitude in the face of unavoidable suffering. Because if you can take unavoidable suffering and find a way to extract the wisdom and insight and meaning from that, there's no higher, honor. And you serve as a true. And look what he did. So through doing that example you gave, he served as this profound example to you. Like, how many years ago did that happen?
That's got to be 45 years ago.
Well, look at that. You are now sharing that one man's example with like millions of people. So we see, and that is exactly the point, when you can face unavoidable suffering heroically, you become an example for so many others that they can do the same.
Yeah, and Viktor Frankl really did face some horrendous suffering.
He did. So believe it or not, the reason he is a catalyst to so many is because, I was in that woe is me, I'm a victim, and of course I have no reason to be a victim. But when I read that book and saw that someone who truly had the right to say I'm a victim didn't, I was like, if he can do it, then it's going to be really easy for me too. And I think for so many people, it takes seeing someone who should be bemoaning his state and finds a way to, turn it into like an entire philosophy that changed millions of lives. That's something I want to model my life after.
Yeah, and just to say that he was in a concentration camp during the Second World War. And, well, as we've said, he's never played that victim card. He has absolutely turned it around and has turned many people's lives around as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can serve in that as a true example for others. So I took this nihilism that really made me feel like there was no meaning to anything and really transformed it into this empowerment. And I think nihilism equals disempowerment. It's when we truly feel that we are a victim of forces against us. And I felt a victim of the darkness that raged through me, even in terms of my creativity. It just poured out of me negatively until I realized I had it all wrong. It was completely the opposite. I had ultimate control and ultimate freedom from the nihilism through my actions and choices alone. And I could literally like wrest that meaninglessness and that darkness into something of incredible beauty that had the ability to touch other people. And that in itself was like a beautiful light running through me.
I'm just curious. Could you actually pinpoint what exactly was the switch that turned the light on?
It was a series of sort of disparate things. You talk about synchronicity, right? That you would have never thought would connect. And that's the point, which makes it even more, I would say, miraculous. So the first dot came in us deciding to start a toy company. And by the way, I never thought of myself as even creative. Like, even though I wrote these verses, I wrote music, I crafted, never used, no one ever said, I mean, my parents were like, oh, yeah, you're pretty creative. Wow, you write music. But I never was thought of as a creative. I never identified with it. When I went to college, I originally wanted to be a lawyer. Like, I never thought of it as something like unique to me. So I think the first dot was when we, just decided like we couldn't stand what we were doing at the time. And we wanted to do something that got us out of bed each morning. And that was a choice of meaning. But I realized just out of sheer like shock that I had the ability to kind of see these toy ideas in my head and bring them to life. And I had never designed anything. I'd never even taken a design course. So that was the first like, wow, this is kind of a cool thing. And it's enabling me now to breathe for the very first time in my life and find meaning. And that kept me alive. I would say, the fact that we were able to form Melissa and Doug together and do this as a partnership, and Doug's very positive and optimistic. And he, through that, kind of infused me with some of his positivity, and building this together gave both our lives profound meaning. So that was the first dot. And then as I started to fall into this, like I'm hiding my truth, right? I'm hiding my darkness. A couple dots started to connect. And the first was I listened to a podcast, and I realized that when something is unconsciously starting to rise to the surface, we start to act differently. And I realized that I was trying to get up the courage to share my truth. And I was, as you said, I was terrified because the world saw me as this one thing, like perfect all the time, like shiny self, one emotion, I'm great, everything's fine. And I was going to have to share this really dark truth to be whole. So I started listening to this podcast of people sharing their truths, and it resonated with me so deeply. And I was like obsessed with listening to it. And one day the host of this show, sorry, two things. The host of the show mentioned that his favorite book was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And the irony is I had it on my shelf. I had read it in my 20s. And although I thought it was a cool story, never really spoke to me. I didn't pick up words like existentialism and logotherapy. I just read it. So I picked it up again. And that book was the book that changed my life because it mentioned existentialism, logotherapy, existential angst. And when I started to, and I'm a word person, like I don't like not understanding what a word means, never heard the word existential. Looked it up and I realized, oh my gosh, I have been, my whole life, I have been suffering from existential depression and a meaning crisis. So that changed my life. And then I had this epiphany that I needed to go on this podcast and share my truth. Now, this was a really popular podcast watched by or listened to by millions of people. I did not know the host. He had lots of really famous guests. And I just decided I was going to write him out of the blue and tell him I wanted to be on his show. So that's what I did. And I ended up going on that show and sharing this truth that I had existential depression, which led to a whole bunch of these overexcitable tendencies and an arousal of my central nervous system, which sort of allows me to be really creative. Because it turns out that those who suffer from existential angst and existential depression and have these overexcitabilities tend to be highly creative also, because we can ponder higher realities.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I can see that Mark is just dying to ask you some more questions. But first of all, we're going to have to go for another break. So we'll be back with more after this from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Hurt Less, Live More with me, JJ, the Practical Alchemist, and Dr. Mark Goulston, plus our special guest today, Melissa Bernstein. And Mark, I think you had a few things to say after hearing all about Melissa's journey before the break.
Yes. Have you ever heard of Irvin Yalom?
I sure have. I actually spoke with him.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I haven't heard of
I'll
him.
mention JJ. So he wrote a book called Existential Psychotherapy. It is one of the most readable books. It was a classic when I was in training. And so Melissa knows what I'm talking about. It's not just for psychiatrists or psychotherapists. It's so well written. And he has a new book out, relatively new, called A Matter of Death and Life. And it's the story of his wife dying. And it is so tender. I also believe that tenderness has left the world.
Oh.
And if you haven't read that, Melissa or JJ, it's just and so what they do is they alternate chapters. He talks about something, she does, and then it's clear that she's going to be dying. And I'm speechless, but if you have a chance to check it out, Melissa, A Matter of Death and Life, it's just unbelievable. And
I would love.
What's the author's name?
Irvin Yalom, Yalom.
He's in his night. I hope
92. He's 92. I think he's still alive. He wrote this last one when he was like 88. Also, are you familiar with A Sense of Coherence by Thich Nhat Hanh?
Oh,
So he's this philosopher. And what he talked about, and this was introduced to me, he said, when people are lost, and I don't think he used the word existential depression, he said what they're seeking is a sense of coherence inside them. And a sense of coherence has three components. The first one is whatever you're finding out has to be comprehensible. It makes your life manageable, and it has to be personally meaningful. So those three elements, something that makes life, geez, this is understandable. It makes my life calm or more manageable, and it has to be personally meaningful. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's right up your alley, Melissa.
yeah. Well, the core premise of logotherapy is humans' primary motivation is the search for meaning, and when that meaning access is frustrated, we fall into an existential vacuum. And I know in all my experience now because now I speak with individuals, not for anything other than just being a support system for them. I see that when we do not have anything of meaning in our lives or enough of meaning in our lives, by definition, we will fall into that vacuum.
Can I give you a quote that I'm giving to you? Because I'm a speechwriter. So I never would have thought of this. So it's yours. I mean, you can say you got it from me, but I would like you to own it.
Thank you.
God did not give us a mind for us to discover that life was meaningless.
Oh, I love that.
That's yours. Take it. My ADD and Alzheimer's it's just bing. It's out of my mind, never to visit it again. But that's yours. God did not give us a mind for us to discover that life was meaningless.
I couldn't agree with that more. So, and I think a lot of the nihilists were atheists.
Mm.
So I think there is a connection. Now you can believe in logotherapy and be an atheist, but there is a really strong connection between meaning and what's called ultimate meaning, which is kind of that aspiring to something beyond ourselves, some sort of nirvana. It could be God, it could be just connection to humanity and something greater.
I heard something, I don't know if it's true. I need to check it out, but someone was talking about these existential philosophers like Nietzsche and all that. And they said, do you actually believe this stuff? And they said, hell no. If I believed it, I'd be depressed all the time. It's just a way of being able to think through what is life all about. Are you kidding? I couldn't live with myself if I actually believed it. It was just a way of taking my thinking to its natural extension.
You know, I would disagree wholeheartedly. So I've studied every single one of them. And I actually, they are the ones that went from being nihilists to discovering existentialism. And the discovery of existentialism was their antidote to killing themselves, literally. And many of them said that if we took our lives, it would be the easy way out. Like, we have an obligation to take responsibility and somehow make something of this. And even Albert Camus, who really was a bit of a nihilist, he discovered absurdism, which said that you don't even have to believe that in the end it's for anything, right? But we still have an obligation to make the most of our time here and make something of it. So that was sort of the halfway, right? It was saying, like, you know, you don't have to believe that you're planting these beautiful seeds of meaning and they'll continue on after you, which is what I want to believe and what I believe and what logotherapy talks about. But you could still, even if you want to be an absurdist, you can still say it's all meaningless in the end. But you know what? I'm here. I was born, so let's make the most of it. And that the absurdism was my bridge from nihilism to existentialism, because that's where I was for a long time. I was an absurdist, and I said, you know what, I don't have to make meaning, whatever it is, all meaningless, I'll just have fun. But the truth was, given that I do believe that our primary motivation is the search for meaning, being an absurdist fell very short. I started to fall into that existential depression again, because I was like, I'm just having fun. I'm doing frivolous things. Like, I need to feel that I'm giving something of myself to the others in the world. It's not enough. So I disagree. I think they were talking through their despair, because they were heady people, and figuring out how can we figure out a model to follow so we can be okay here. And most of them weren't okay. Nietzsche died like absolutely a nihilist and miserable, even though he tried so hard to find reasons to live. And many of them still died very despairing, but they were trying.
So let me ask you something. Many of our listeners are hardworking, overwhelmed women, 25 to 45. And as they're listening in, many of them are just trying to make it through their lives. They're depressed. They don't make necessarily connection to existential depression. And they might say, this is fascinating. Can you make it a little less heady for us?
Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
I mean, it's really simply that you have to take ownership of your schedule and find little ways, even if it's, I say, 3 minutes a day of infusing joy into your life. Because what happens to so many, I mean, I have 6 children and I fell into that too. It was like, one day just blends into another, and you're just picking up, dropping off, this, that, like you have no time, and you're starting to just become an automaton, right? You're like robotically going through. It's saying, like, if you continue to do that, you will by definition fall into a state of despair because you've lost yourself. So it's remembering what are those things that do give me joy. And for most people, music is one of them. So for me, when I was in those days when it was like I couldn't even breathe, I started by saying, I am going to listen to one song a day in privacy. Three minutes, 3.5 minutes, even if I have to lock myself in the bathroom. And my playlist has become one of my most treasured possessions. Every song on that playlist could take a nihilist out of nihilism. Like they're that uplifting and soul stirring. So you have to, get a group of songs that no matter how you're feeling, they can you want to start moving and dancing. And start small, start with 3 minutes and just closing your eyes and saying, wow, this makes me feel alive and joyful. Or again, a walk around your block, one loop, if you can get out. Some people can't even get out to do that. But I'm talking these little moments of surprise and delight that you start to infuse back into your day and make you remember what it means to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. So it is another exercise I do. One last one is I call it 3 rays of sunshine. So many of we harried moms go to bed with our heads full. And all we're thinking about as we're falling asleep is, oh my gosh, like all these things went wrong today. I didn't get half the things on my to-do list done. I've got all this stuff to do tomorrow. And I fall asleep with just this, So I wasn't sleeping well, right? I'd wake up in the middle of the night. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I forgot to put that on my list. And I have to write things down. It was not peaceful sleep. So I said, I want to change it. So now in that period between when I lay down and when I fall asleep, I rethink over the day and I think about 3 good things that happened that day. When I started doing this, it was impossible. All I was thinking about were all the things that didn't go right. Like my mindset was only on the negative. And the first day I was like, I can't even think of anything until I was like, you have to think of 3 things. So I was like, oh, I had a cup of tea today. Actually, it was kind of warm and it tasted good. I like that. Oh, wait, I petted my dog, for a few minutes. That was kind of cool. So I had to literally reframe it. And now I do it every single night. Now I fall asleep on number 7 or 8 or 9. Like I can't even stop at 3. And it's an amazing way to reframe and to basically take this negative mindset of everything that's wrong into, even despite the fact that life is hard and it's grueling, there are moments of profound joy each day that we just skirt right by and don't even realize they're moments of joy. It's changed my sleep. It's changed my mindset. And now when something good happens, like tonight, I will talk about this, I'll be like, that was a really cool conversation. So, and when it happens now, I'm actually thinking, oh, I have to remember that one for tonight.
Oh, that is so fantastic. And we have loved having you on the show, but we're coming to the end of it now. Fantastic words of wisdom from you there. Mark, any final thoughts?
If I asked Doug, so what do you think of this journey that Melissa's been on? What would he say?
Wow, that almost has me speechless. What would he say? He would say she's a lot more verbose than she used to be.
Yeah, can I channel people? Can I tell you what I think he'd say?
Yes.
She has so earned the right to be positive, and I love the way it looks on her.
Oh, no, he would definitely say that. He would say she is in her element and she's really doing what she was meant to do, which is to help others channel their own darkness into light and make meaning.
I love it. And on that extremely positive, light note, it really is the end of our show right now. Thank you so much, Melissa. It's been wonderful to speak with you today. lifelines.com is your one of your websites, isn't it?
It sure
Lifeline.
is. That's
Yeah,
where,
so
and anybody can contact me directly too, melissa@lifelines.com. I will happily respond to anyone who contacts me.
perfect. Thank you so much. It's the end of the show. Join us another time here on Hurt Less, Live More. But for now, it's goodbye from me, JJ. It's goodbye from Mark. And it's goodbye from our fantastic guest today, Melissa Bernstein.
Bye, everybody. Do something playful today.